there today, although we're going to do something a little bit different. We're actually going to be skipping a part of it and going to the very end. But I wanted to start off by telling you a little bit about a story, not of our recent move from Texas to North Dakota, but rather a move that my wife and our family, our kids were 9th grade all the way down to 4th grade, had made back in 1999 from California to Missouri. We, as we did recently, we rented a Penske truck, and it has been something that had been working in our hearts for a long time to make the move. We were asked to go to Springfield to help write some curriculum, and so we went there with the idea that we're going to be doing all this stuff, but that one thing we didn't do was we didn't plan on where we're going to live and what we're going to, basically what's going to happen when we get there. So my wife and I, we go over to pick up the truck, and the lady asking, well, where are you going anyways? We said, Springfield, Missouri. And they go, wow, that's a long ways away. They said, what are you going to be doing there? And we told her, and she goes, well, we have a place to stay. And they go, when we go, nope, we're going to find it when we get there. And she's like, you don't have a place to stay? You're just doing this by faith? And I was like, yep, we just know that God's telling us to go there. We have no place where we're going to stay. We don't know what we're going to do when we get there, but we just know that God's told us to be there. And I start working like a week or two. She goes, you know what, because of that, I'm going to give you a discount. She saved us $1,000 on that rental truck. I couldn't believe it. And it's because she saw something in Angel and I as we talked about it and the joy of being able to follow God's will and to listen to Him, that she rewarded us with something like, of course, we weren't expecting that at all, but it was really fun that we got to see that. So, we're going to skip chapter 4 and 5. We're going to go right to the very end. So let me ask you guys a question. If you were going to be writing a letter to somebody, and let's just say I'm going to use Charles. Charles he owns the motel here in town, and he runs this motel, and just say that he needs to leave this motel in the hands of someone else, maybe for a short time or maybe for a long time. Well, he's going to write letters and instructions on what he wants to do, and he's going to tell them this is the best way in which to run this motel. In fact, he and I have had a conversation about this. We talked about who is the most important person in the motel business, and it's really not, the owner or something like that. It's really the people who take care of the customers who come in. Well, he would like to leave this information with someone, and so he would write this all on a list. Well, what we're going to discover in the very last part of Thessalonians is he kind of did the same thing. If you look closely, it looks like a bullet list. Now, of course, we don't put it that way in the scriptures, but if you look at it clearly, you can see there's these little short instructions that he's going to give because he wants his church to be successful. And so we're going to cover chapters 4 and 5 at the very end of the month because we do have a series we're going to do for Christmas, and we're going to cover that in the meantime. God brought us here to Wishick. It has been a great opportunity for my wife and I. People have asked us, well, what do you think of it so far? In fact, Terry's mom this morning asked us, what do we think? Did we like it in North Dakota? She says, oh, we love it. She says, oh, I'm so glad that you like it here. And so we are very blessed to be here. In fact, we are very honored to be here. And Paul, he'd only been a short time with this church, but yet he loved that church there so much in Thessalonica that he wanted them to be successful. So he leaves them these instructions. Now, what I'm going to do for just a little bit here is I just want to kind of share with you that there seems like in our life that there are too many paths. And maybe for some of us that's true. Maybe for some of us we've lived here all of our life. And it seems like this is the only place we're supposed to be and we're supposed to do this here. But for many of us, my wife and I have even lived overseas in the Philippines as missionaries. And so it seems like God has taken us all over this country and all over the world. But Paul wanted to remind the Thessalonians that he is in control. They had a burning question in their heart about the end times, which I'll answer in the last week of this month. And so he spends more than a chapter on that very one question about God coming back and what does it mean for them. Because some of their believers, some of their friends had already died. And he wanted to know what's going to happen to them. But he wants them to be successful, and he wants them to be able to stand up to all the persecution. And first he wanted to share with them, this is what I mentioned over and over again, that God is in control. He's in control of your sanctification process. He's in control of what happens within the church. And then the second thing is he does reveal himself. And so we're going to see how Paul now teaches that to his people. But first, real quickly, I'm just going to go over real quickly the outline, and then we're going to focus mostly on verses 16 through 18. Now, the first thing he does is he has some personal requests. Now, a lot of times, if you see where he talks about the leaders of the church, usually it's about a problem that happened in the church. This time, there doesn't seem to be any problem mentioned in this church. Everything seems to be going well. They're standing up and facing persecution. They're loving people, and they become famous all over the region. So I think what he's trying to do is be proactive. He's trying to tell people, your leaders are important and show honor to them. In about a month or so here, we're going to have our annual church meeting, and we're going to be nominating and bringing on new people in leadership roles here at the church. And I pray as we go through this process that you'll be in prayer for that God will bring the right people. We'll be able to lift them up and respect them and honor them as they do so. But he also provided some final instructions in verses 14 through 22, and we'll cover those in just a few minutes. But then he sums up the entire book in one statement, and that is verse 23 and 24, and we're going to cover that, and we're actually going to do that as our benediction. And then lastly, in verses 25 through 28, he wants to state again his love and his affection for the church. I mean, he's done it in the very beginning, he's done it in almost every chapter, and then he does it again in chapter 5. Again, it just shows how much he loved that church and how proud of them he was. But here's where the problem is. So here's the first of these bullet points. It says, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, in everything give thanks. You're thinking, oh my, that's quite a list of things to do. We're supposed to always rejoice. Always supposed to have a smile on our face, even though it might be fake. We're supposed to be praying all the time. I mean, we're supposed to have all these, things on our knees. We're supposed to be praying the whole day. And everything that happens in our life, we're supposed to be thankful for? Come on, God. This is a little bit much. So what's Paul trying to say here? What's he trying to do? He wanted to address the leaders first, but then he addressed the brethren. He actually uses the word brethren. It's a very personal term. Like in the Philippines, they have much respect for their elders. And so if you're an older brother who's close to them, either familial or just good friendship, they'll call you manong. It's a very affectionate term. If you're an older sister, they'll call you manang. And if you're a younger sibling or a younger close friend, they'll call you ading. They have words that have special meaning to them. And Paul does that same thing with this word, brethren. He uses it 60 times in all of his letters, but 27 times he uses them in these two letters to the Thessalonians. So it shows you how much affection he had for this church. He loved them so much. And so, when he says here, rejoice always, doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be happy about certain things. So many times I've done counseling and I've had young ladies come in and they're struggling with their relationship with their spouse or their boyfriend, and they said, I just know the Lord wants me to be happy. And sometimes that's what guides them about their relationship with a young man or their husband. And the reality is, it's not necessarily that God wants us to be happy. God wants us to be joyful. That's why Paul and Silas could sing in the prison in Philippi, even though they were bound for no reason at all, except the fact that they were talking about this new religion. And they were being persecuted, yet they could sing joyful noises to the Lord. Now, they probably weren't very happy about being in jail. I mean, how many of you guys would like to be happy in jail? Yeah, I didn't think so. Not one hand raised. I didn't think so. And especially those jails. I mean, they were like dungeons. They were horrible places to be. But Paul and Silas could be joyful, and they realized that God was using them at that time. And in fact, you guys know the story if you read it. All of a sudden, there's a big earthquake as in the middle of their singing. The jailer's like, oh no, he's despondent. He's about ready to kill himself because he thought all the prisoners had left. Not a single one had. And then Paul and Silas were able to speak to him, and he and his whole family came to know Christ. That's why Paul and Silas could be joyful about that time. Doesn't mean that we're excited about everything that happens in our life. Then the next thing is pray without ceasing. This is the whole idea that our whole attitude should be one of being in communion with God. My wife, she she and I have to drive many, many times as we lived in Missouri back and forth to California. And we would leave at 4 in the afternoon on a Thursday, and I would drive until 4 in the morning, and then I would sleep for a couple hours while she drove. And then around 8 o'clock or so, I'd get back in the seat again, and I'd drive until about 10 o'clock that night to get back to California. So about 31 hour drive. We stopped for gas and food and so forth. But when they were asleep at night, I didn't have music on. That was my time just to be with the Lord. And I wasn't necessarily asking things of God. I just was spending time with Him. And that's really what the praying without ceasing is about. It's not about being on your knees all day long and asking for things or telling Him that there's certain things going on and that you want help in or whatever. It's about having an attitude that I'm going to be with Him all the time. That I'm going to have a spirit of thankfulness because I'm with Him all the time. But then it also is in everything give thanks. Now again, let's predicate this very clearly. It doesn't mean that you have to be joyful or happy about the situations that you're in. Everyone in this room has faced some sort of trial, some sort of pain in their life. Melissa expressed some of that in her poem today. I'm very proud that you were able to do that. The Lord does have certain things that happen in our life. We don't always understand why. We don't always understand the pain. And in the years to come, as Angel and I share with you our love and our passion for Him and for His kids, for our kids, we will share with you some of those pains ourselves. There are times it still hurts. But you know what? God uses that and uses the pain that we may be going through right now. We don't always understand why. But be grateful that He's using you. Wherever it may be. It could be in Wishick, it could be in Fargo. I just met a young lady, I should say. Well, she is a young lady. Vernell? And some of you may know her. She was from here, but then she moved away to Fargo. 2 years ago, she came back, and she's thinking she doesn't want to come back to a small little town. But she says the best decision that they made. They're so happy to be here. I met her at the Santa thing on Friday night. And so we got to talk a little bit, and she's just grateful to be here. But you just never know why God would bring you back to certain things. Now what's interesting is, the reason why I'm preaching on this week is because it's connected to what God was talking about last week, about God purifying His church. And the whole idea is that God, it's His will, and He will purify us, and these are the ways. In fact, these three things here, if you really look at it closely, it's what would be involved in a worship service, isn't it? There's actually some people who believe that these instructions were meant for a worship service. And let me share with you why that's true. So in the next one it says, do not quench the spirit. Do not despise prophecy. Test all things. Hold fast to good and abstain from evil. Again, we have this idea that we think it's some sort of checklist of things that Paul wanted to express to the church. But yet there's something very interesting about it. The word quench here is the idea of putting out a fire. So in other words, there's supposed to be a fire within us. As we come together, there should be an excitement and a joy as we serve the Lord. You know, it's not about having fog on your stage and lights and this amazing, outstanding worship band and some pastor who can just preach the shoes off your feet. That's not what it's necessarily about. It's about coming together and knowing that we get to share together God's goodness. And so, but you know what? It's not just Sunday morning. Wednesday night we came here to practice. The choir came to practice. I got to sit in there while they were practicing it. And Georgina's going, I don't know we're going to try to get this done tonight and figure it out, and we'll try to sing it on Sunday morning. We haven't sung this one in a while. Within like 30 minutes, they had it. And so I get to sit here and enjoy this. And in the meantime, they're all cutting up. Well, you know what they have to. You got Bill, one of them there. So Bill's in there. He's cutting up with everybody, and making jokes. Everyone's having a great time. Of course, Mary Ann, she had to make sure that she does. And every time a kid came around, she's jumping up in joy, and we had a great time. It was so much fun. It may seem a little chaotic at times, we were joyful. We were enjoying it. We were spending time together. When we went over to Charles and Brenda's house for Thanksgiving, we had such a great time. And in the days to come, as we share more with you, as we share meals together, we're going to enjoy that. So it's whenever we gather together. Maybe together we'll go and watch a football game together. But it's a time, or maybe share coffee on one of the mornings. I guess they meet at Piccadilly. My wife went on Saturday with the ladies, and she just had a blast. And where'd you go, sweetheart? To where? Big Screen? Oh, the pizza place, I guess. And so, I guess it's pizza and others. Oh, it's a bar. Oh. Pastor's wife going to a bar. Hey, where would Jesus be, right? That's where he'd be. I don't know if he'd be tossing down a few, but he'd be with them, that's for sure. But you see, this whole idea of being together, to not quench the Spirit. You know, I could have, as an authority, I could have said, hey, let's get this all calmed down, let's get this together, let's make it happen, because Sunday is a really important day. Instead, I said, no, let's enjoy the moment. And it all came together. Unfortunately, Peggy was sick this morning and we couldn't do it. But we will do it. Maybe January something, when the time is right. But enjoy it together. Do not quench what the Spirit of God is doing in your life and the opportunities that He gives you to do that. But it also is this idea of do not despise prophecies. Now, remember, there is no Bible at this time. Even the Old Testament has not been solidified as books. It wasn't until about 60 years after Jesus died on the cross that the Old Testament that we have today became even what we have. And it wasn't until about 300 years afterward that the New Testament became what it was. And so the idea of prophecy was this whole idea of God speaking to His people. And it was through these times. And so He wanted to make sure that do not despise the prophecies. Do not despise my word being preached among you. And that's again why we think that this is probably instructions for a church service. And so when the words that come, but at the same time He says, do not despise prophecy, but then He says, test all things. Now what's interesting, remember in Acts chapter 17, we hear the story of Philippi, where he leaves Philippi, and then they go to Berea, and they're only there for a short time too, and then they go to Thessalonica, they're only there for a short time, and then finally he makes his way all the way down to Corinth. But when he was in Berea, he says something. He says, when he was there, they were more honorable than the Thessalonians, which is kind of funny, because he loves the Thessalonians so much, because they studied the Bible daily to prove what Paul was saying. So what the scriptures they knew of, the Old Testament, they were reading them and proving what Paul had to say. Now, I hope that I never teach untruth here. I hope that I never teach something that's not right. But if I do, I expect someone to call me on the carpet for it. Probably be Charles. Charles and I have a relationship where I think that we could speak into each other's lives that way. We're not afraid to say that to one another. We're not going to hurt each other's feelings. And that's the same with all of us. There'll be times like, Pastor Brian, I didn't quite understand what you meant by this. It seemed like you're saying this. It may be just because I didn't say it very well. But it says here to test all things. Test to see what is true. And that's why the last statement is not this overwhelming thing of hold fast to the good and then avoid evil. That's not what that's about as a whole. What it's actually speaking about is hold to the good when it's preached, but watch out for the evil. Many of us have seen or heard of church services where they hardly even speak the word of Christ in the sermon or in the church itself. And they have some good things to say, and maybe there are some good things, encouraging things and uplifting things. But when they don't lift up the name of Christ and when they don't honor Him, that's a form of evil, because they're denying His power and His presence. And so that is why it's so important that we have to get what is good and what is true and genuine. That's what we need to find out. And that's why we need to search the scriptures. It means three things. Now I have it up here, but I was reading one of my textbooks last night, preparation for my class on Monday. And these three things came clear. One of the things that we're supposed to do as a church is to encourage one another. And we saw this in this book frequently, where Paul encouraged them and encouraged them. But then also to exhort them. He also exhorted them to do more. Not just be satisfied with the love that you have, but to be even better at it. But then lastly, he also provided enlightenment, which we'll discover in this month, when he reveals some questions and explains some questions that they had about Jesus coming back. And those are the three things we should be doing: encouraging, exhorting, and enlightening one another. So how does God guide his church? First of all, he's the center. If it's not centered on God, then we're not going to know his will. If we don't do what he asks, once we take our eyes off him and focus upon ourselves, then we lose sight of his will for us. But it's also done corporately. You know, in America, we have this thing that we're very individualistic. Some of it's the reason why our country has become so wealthy, because we have that individualistic spirit, that exploring spirit. I'm sure that if I was born 150 years ago, I'd probably be a mountain man or something. I'd probably be out in the middle of nowhere hunting beavers, and that's probably an angel's going like this. No. Well, an angel, back then, the mountain man, most times their wives were Indian, so I probably wouldn't be married to you, Dave, so I'm just saying. But it's done corporately. We lose sight of that. Now, if you've had any now, maybe not so much here. I think I see much more family orientation here in this community than in most. But in many communities, there's not family that's really important. It's the individual's important. But here and throughout the scriptures, that's why Paul uses the phrase brethren to them. And then lastly, he gives as much as we need to walk in obedience to him. I would really like to know what he's going to do with me next. There have been times he has. When I went to Springfield, and I was working at this headquarters writing curriculum, within a year or two there, he revealed to me that my next position would be a children's pastor. So, the first thing I did was, I started volunteering at a church in children's ministries. I became part-time on that church. And I did that for the next 4 years until I left. And sure enough, the next job I had was a children's pastor. Now, this last time, he didn't do that to me. He did it to my wife. I had no idea that we were going to be coming here. And I'll share with you this one little story, and then we're going to close up. Back in May, actually before that, I knew our company was about ready to close up. And I was going to do everything I could to save as many jobs as I could, to help as many people as I could. I was able to save 90% of the jobs, except for a couple jobs in the office of my own. I knew my time was getting soon, so I put some feelers out there. Maybe there's someone in the church world that could use a 56-year-old children's pastor. I thought that was far and few between. So once I put it out there, I didn't even do any more about it. But then, a young lady in our church that my wife and I had mentored and taken her through some hard times in her life, and encouraged her to wait for the right man. She was nearing the end of her 20s. She was so anxious about having a boyfriend and then a husband. She was willing to take chances, and we shared with her and encouraged her to do that. Finally, she met a young man. He's a good man. A good, godly man. And she came to Angel, and she goes, Angel, are you guys going to be busy in November? And she says, we're not going to be available. So she comes to me. Her name is Kayla. She comes to me, and she's got tears running down her face. Pastor Brian, I thought you could do my wedding for me. It's going to be in November. And I'm like, took out my phone and look at my calendar. I'm like, I don't have anything going on in November. I don't know what Angel's talking about. And she goes, well, are you going to be able to do it for me? I said, yes, I'll do your wedding for you. So, a few months later, all of a sudden, the call comes from Wishing. And so you remember that Sunday we met after church. I said, there's only one condition though. I have a wedding to do in November. Otherwise, I would have been here earlier. And they said, well, why don't you just wait until after the wedding and then you can come and start being the pastor here. And so I finally, about a week or two later, I went to Angel and I said, Angel, you've known that we were going to move 6 months ago? She goes, yes. And you didn't share that with me? No. Oh, fine. Reveal my weaknesses already. Yeah, I'm like every man. I don't listen. But God shared with her that we were not going to be in Texas. I don't know if He shared with her that we were going to come here. But then, as soon as we got the call, or as soon as we got the email about the church, Angel knew. I didn't. Angel did. And in fact, Roxy talked about it gave her goose pimples when she heard that Angel already knew that this is where we're supposed to be. God only gives us as much as we need to walk in obedience to Him. Throughout that time when I was concerned about what God was going to do with us, all the time He was comforting my wife, because she's the one that really needed the most. Because we're going to have to leave behind her folks, my folks, our daughter and son-in-law, and 2 grandkids that live within just a few minutes of us. And I knew the Lord did that for Angel because He needed to prepare her heart. I was willing to go wherever. I could go to Russia. I don't care. I'll go live in an igloo somewhere. Angel won't, but I will. So what do we learn from this message? We are a part of His plan. But so are others. Share with someone this week how God has guided you. The other day, Clyde was very nervous about getting things ready for Roxy as she was coming back from her vacation. He was working on her house. And he was thinking about how he can get this one piece of Formica in his shower. It was very large and unwieldy, and if you've ever worked with Formica, it just wobbles and it's just very hard to work with. He was using contact cement, which means once you touch it, that's it. It's done. It's on. And so I know that he was thinking about how can I solve the problem of doing this. And he came up with the idea of grabbing the suction cups. And so I went over there for about 15 minutes, all it took, and I held that thing up in the air while he started at the bottom and then just moved it up into place. But he'd been thinking about it for days before that. And I know that the reason why I bring that up is for these 3 reasons. One is it was something he prayed about and was thinking about. Number 2 is that it was something that he knew that he could solve, that he knew that God would give him the answer. And the last one was, he wanted to do right by a friend. That was his way of being obedient to God. Now, I don't know if Clyde's one of the nervous ones where he's, something's bothering him and it just completely nags at him, or if he just takes it with the right attitude. I'm sure in time I'll discover that. I'm pretty sure he's the one that just says, you know what? I know the Lord's going to show me. I'm not going to worry about it. In His time, He'll show me. But that's how God will use us. So church, talk about how God guides us, how He guides you. Go out and proclaim it. In the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about Christmas. How many of you guys have sung that song, We Three Kings? Yeah, I'm sure a bunch of us have. Now, you do know that song is kind of not really true, right? Most likely those guys were probably not kings. But I decided to choose that title for this message, about 3 kings. And the question I want you to be pondering this next week is, the king sits on a throne. My question to you is, which king is going to be sitting on your throne? You have 3 choices. So that's what we're going to be discovering over the next 3 weeks as we talk about the 3 kings. And so I hope that you're there and you bring others with you as well and share. We're going to sing hymn 501, and then we're going to close with